regulators and technology, playing catch-up or being proactive.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this last panel today. I'm very happy to have with me two panelists representing two different regulatory authorities in Malta. We are currently missing one panelist, Annalise, who got stuck in traffic, unfortunately, but if when she arrives, the panel is still ongoing, she can, of course, jump in and join us on the panel. So, to my right, I have Brendan Debattista, who is Deputy Chief Regulatory at the Malta Gaming Authority, and also, next to him, Herman Ciappara, who is the Head of Fintech at the Malta Financial Services Authority. During this panel, we shall discuss the interplay between regulators and technology. So, as we know, technologies such as blockchain and AI now as well are infiltrating different industries, including regulated industries such as gaming and financial services. But how receptive are Maltese authorities to innovative technologies? And are they being proactive in this respect, or are they simply playing catch-up when it comes to technology? Brendan, first question to you. So, following developments in the world of blockchain and crypto, we have seen that the MDIA over the past year or so has developed a policy which essentially allows operators to make use of DLT and crypto in a very innovative way for a regulator to do so. So what was the process behind the development of this policy, and what is the feedback you got so far?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So it all started in 2018 when we started to work on the sandbox framework. Essentially, the process consisted in an outreach exercise where we reached out to other regulators such as the MFSA, MDIA, and also the FIU, and started to get feedback whilst also carrying out our own research in order to start understanding the technology before actually rolling out a definitive policy. So we launched the sandbox framework, and essentially we allowed operators to start accepting crypto as a means of payment, whilst also allowing them to implement the technology in various ways, such as the use of DLT platforms and also smart contracts. And all of this happened within a controlled environment where we were able to monitor these types of activities with certain safeguards in place that were specifically applicable to the sandbox framework, such as deposit limits and also certain notification requirements which went over and above the general framework, so to speak. So fast forward to January of this year, and we published the DLT policy. And this was also preceded by extensive consultation, where again, we reached out to regulators to ensure alignment, but we also got feedback from the industry. And when I say the industry, not just operators, but also payment service providers, which had very valuable insight that was ultimately reflected in the policy. In terms of feedback, I'd say this was generally positive. And we've heard from operators that this was actually one of its kind within a gaming context. So yes, it was very well received. And we also saw an increase in the applications following the publication of the DLT policy, where operators are more and more seeking to incorporate this type of technology within their operations. Of course, this doesn't mean that we'll stop here, especially with certain developments taking place, such as MiCA, and also learned experiences from our end. So we don't exclude revisiting the policy in the future to reflect these developments and improve it further.
Thank you, Brendan. I think what the MGA did here was a very good example of actually being proactive as a regulator. Now, when it comes to AI, Brendan, how do you see presently, and maybe how do you foresee in the future, AI infiltrating the gaming industry? And do you have any plans to take a similar proactive approach as you did with crypto and DLTs to encourage operators to embrace AI?
Yeah, so in the case of AI, the approach that we've taken is a bit different. So whilst in the case of DLT, we have a specific policy which which tackles the use of the technology. In the case of AI, this was tackled by means of the overarching gaming framework, where we have certain principles in place, tech-neutral principles that ultimately guide operators in terms of what they can and cannot do with the technology. It's also important to remember that our industry has been riding on the AI wave for years now. It's not something new. So yeah, essentially these principles would guide operators in terms of what they can and cannot do. But at the same time, we try as much as possible to couple this with the risk-based approach that we try to implement in our processes. So in the case of AI, a very prevalent concern and something which is a topic of discussion at the moment is transparency. And we've addressed this by through our checks, through the familiarization visits that we carry out, the audits that we carry out, and ultimately we try to make sure that we understand, but also operators understand and know how they're using these tools in terms of the data that is being inputted into these tools, the type of data, and also the data that is being generated by these tools, and specifically the interpretability of this data. So we try as much as possible to understand it from our end, but also make sure that operators have teams that are knowledgeable and know how to use these tools, in order, of course, to meet the expectations and the standards set from our end. Of course, we don't exclude actually rolling out policies in the futures, but at this point in time, at least, we're very satisfied in the way in which we have approached AI, and we're trying as much as possible to give a certain level of freedom and discretion to operators in terms of how they use this technology. But at the same time, ensuring that our own regulatory objectives are safeguarded and, of course, not prejudiced by the use of this technology.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Herman, on to you. So, as head of the Fintech team within the MFSA, you must oversee some of the most innovative projects in your industry. From a regulatory perspective, what is the MFSA doing and what has it done? We're aware of the VFA framework, which was enacted a few years back. But basically, what are you currently doing to allow your operators to invest in innovative technologies while safeguarding customers who make use of the services of your operators?
Thanks, Patrick, for that. Let's just go back a bit and just be proud of what we've done. As you rightly mentioned, there's way back in November 2018, so 5 years ago, Malta enacted the VFA Act, the Virtual Financial Assets Act. Essentially, we were one of the first few jurisdictions globally that enacted a regulation, a full-blown regulation to regulate crypto assets. And I think this is the proof, the real proof of the pudding that, yes, Malta as a jurisdiction is very proactive in adopting new regulation to regulate upcoming technologies. In this case, it was crypto assets. There were sisters legislations as well, MDIA, the MDIA Act, whereby Malta actually came about and established an authority to look at innovative technology, and also the ITAS Act, dealing with innovative technology arrangements. So this is what we've done 5 years before MiCA. As Brandon mentioned, MiCA, now Europe has just, MiCA came into force, the Markets in Crypto Assets regulation just came into force in June of this year, 5 years essentially after what we did with our VFA framework, and essentially doing the same thing. So we're very proactive. I think the fact that we took this huge leap to go into blockchain, go into regulation of crypto assets before anyone else shows that we were really on it. The fact that we created a whole new function, my own team, specifically dedicated to fintech, including crypto assets. So that was number one. We came up in 2019 with a fintech strategy which lays out what we want to do in the fintech space. In 2020, like our colleagues at MGA, we launched the sandbox, a fintech regulatory sandbox, essentially with the same scope, essentially allowing service providers to come to us talk to us about their service, their platforms, their service offerings, and to ensure that we understand the technology being used, whether it's smart contracts, whether it's DLT, whether it's machine learning, whatever it was, and ensure that see where it fits, because there are spaces within the regulatory frameworks that do not cover everything. So if we identify gaps, that would help us identify the risks and potentially find ways to mitigate them. And obviously always keeping in mind investor protection. So as Brendan mentioned, testing, understanding, putting limits, etc., and seeking the right authorization processes. So that was very, very important. In fact, we've collaborated very closely with MGA in their sandbox, because obviously their operators were also being licensed by us. So essentially, we found this good way of working together. You asked me, what are we doing? Essentially, outreach. We really need to understand ourselves, what's happening. So there's always an arm within my team doing research, understanding. We're also publishing what we call Finsights. They're on our website, check them out. These are like quick and dirty 4-pagers about anything under the sun that's new, that's happening. So it's DLT, smart contracts, cloud computing, APIs, AI, decentralized finance, open finance, embedded finance, just to give a flavor to the public, and also important to our colleagues within the MFSA. We're looked at as the guys who are always looking at new things, while the more traditional sectors like insurance, like securities, like pensions, these are the guys who are more traditional. And we have a duty to educate ourselves first and foremost, and prepare ourselves for what's happening out there. So this is a very important task that we do. Last year, we also launched this Fintech adoption study. So we ran a survey across the largest of our license holders, over 500 of them, where we asked them, where are you going with your digital strategy? What emerging technologies are you using? We had a 97% response rate. This was not mandatory, it was voluntary. And through this study, which is also on our website, we got a good understanding of where Malta is in terms of jurisdiction. This helps us prepare, this helps us understand, and this helps us push the right buttons in terms of where we're going in the future.
Thank you, Herman. I think from my point of view, the fact that the MiCA regulation is essentially a replica of what the MFSA, together with the government at the time, came up with 5 years ago, is in itself a certificate of being proactive. And more importantly, getting it right. Because
completely,
it's one thing coming up with a framework which is essentially not something which any European authority would seek to implement. But it's another thing having the European Union replicate what you, together with your team, came up with 5 years ago. So hats off for that.
To be fair, because replicate is a bit of a strong word. To be fair, we followed MiFID principles, and the EU followed MiFID principles. So obviously, since we follow the same principles, we do have a very high degree of similarities. Yes. Maybe they did not copy us, but they copied MiFID, which we based our own legislation.
Yes, but we've seen other jurisdictions who have tried
completely
to come up with something which did not ultimately.
Completely. This is one big feather in our cap.
Very good. Annalise, so recent talks, Annalise, have focused on the EU AI Act. This would be the world's first comprehensive AI legislation, which seeks to implement a standard regulatory framework for artificial intelligence throughout the EU. Now, as an authority, you represent the MDIA here. What will be your role under this act, and what steps have you taken so far in preparing for the implementation of this EU AI Act?
First of all, thank you for WH Partners for hosting this nice panel. Yes, the AI Act is currently in its drafting phase. It was first published by the European Commission back in April 2021, as I'm sure all of you know here. And the EU Council then amended that version way back in December 2022. And last May, we saw the version of the European Parliament. So at this stage, we are at a trialogue stage at the EU, which means that all three EU institutions are discussing these versions to decide upon an ultimate and final version. And what does that mean for the EU and also for the MDIA, the Malta Digital Innovation Authority, as the lead authority in AI? It means that we have to keep on following these continuous discussions so that we can delineate at which point we are going to take our role. For example, taking the version of last December, we saw the concept of a national competent authority. However, way back in this May, we saw the concept of a national supervisory authority, which roles are different. The first one is based on a notifying authority or a market surveillance authority. However, the version of May, that of Parliament, it would have given the authority a role of coordination and implementation of the AI Act. So ultimately, our role will depend on the final version, but as an MDIA, we are following it continuously. We're following the developments. And we are also amending our legislation, which we intend to put forward to Cabinet this year, so that our legislative framework would be prepared both for the EU AI Act, but also for the convention, which is being prepared by the Council of Europe. This is a separate dossier. It is being drafted at international level. There are countries which are not members of the EU, such as the USA, Mexico, and other countries. And so we will be seeing in the near future two different legislations, a convention from the Council of Europe and a regulation from the EU.
Okay, thank you for that, Annalise. So you're currently, I can see you're very busy with preparing for the AI Act. Our time is soon up, but I have one supplementary question for you, Annalise. So one of the main concerns surrounding AI has been and still is data protection. So much so that we have seen the Italian Data Protection Authority go as far as banning the use of ChatGPT at one point and then backtracking on their decision. As now data protection officer of the authority which you represent, the Malta Digital Innovation Authority, what are your views of these concerns, and especially when it comes to the processing of data and developing algorithms?
One thing that we must keep in mind is that the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is also transposed in our legislation, it is a regulation and it has a horizontal implications. And what does that mean? It means that whatever we're going to do, whether it's AI, whether it's another technology, we must always protect the data of the personal data of data subjects. We also have enshrined in our constitution and in our conventions the right for privacy. So that is something that we always have to keep in mind. With respect to these to AI and these technologies, as well as my role as DPO as well at the MDIA, we are always in constant communication with the IDCP, the Information and Protection Commissioner in Malta, so that we ensure that what we are building on the AI Act and in our legislation would protect the data subjects as well.
Very good. One quick comment from Brendan and Herman. So for Malta to further strengthen its position in attracting new tech-based business, it is essential, in my opinion, that different regulators share a common approach towards emerging technology. How do you, as MGA and MFSA, even MDIA, cooperate in this respect? Brendan?
Yeah, so regulatory cooperation has always been part of the MGA's agenda, but I believe that in recent years we've put a lot of emphasis on it, and at this point it has become an essential part of our regulatory strategy. An example of this is the periodic workshop that we organize, which we call MGA Meets, where we invite multiple stakeholders at the MGA, including fellow regulators, in order to have productive discussions relating to concurrent topics. For example, recently we had one with the FIU and we had a very good turnout. Apart from this, at this point, before we roll out policies or take decisions which will have an impact on businesses or operations, we always make sure that first we're aligned with other regulators by means of outreach. And also organize specific workshops on this specifically in order to get feedback. So yes, it's definitely something that we believe in and we plan to continue doing. And we also have a very dedicated international and policy team, which as part of its functions, researches what other jurisdictions are doing, reach out to our foreign regulatory counterparts, and ultimately help the MGA to make more informed decisions and more data-driven decisions.
Thank you, Brendan. One last comment from you, Herman, and we wrap up.
Completely agree with Brandon. We obviously reach out all the time because we're sharing the same technologies, we're sharing the same market, and probably we're sharing the same players as well. So not just on the policy side, but even on the operational side and supervision side, we share a lot of information. Same with MDIA, especially with their ITAS and their systems audit and their now upcoming AI, which is prevalent a lot in financial services. So we need to know what's happening. We coordinate who's doing what to ensure that we do it properly. And as Brandon also mentioned, the international dimension, we cannot ignore what's happening out there. We are a very small jurisdiction, not necessarily the biggest market in the world. So we have our other foreign supervisors, other foreign regulators. We reach out in fora, we discuss, we learn, we bring it and we share. So completely.
Thank you very much. Guys, on that note, we have to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us and thank you to the panelists.